Artcasters number 197. We're creeping up on the big 200. You've got Gerimi Burleigh with us today. It's been a while since you've been on. How's it going, Gerimi?
Good. Thanks for having me on, guys. Good to be back.
Definitely. We'll get back to Gerimi in a minute, but first we'll kind of go around and introduce ourselves. You're on my channel, so you probably, I assume you know who I am. The only thing really I have to promote is the Comic Maker Toolkit, as usual. If you've been watching me lately, you'll know that I've just released a product called the Comic Maker Toolkit. It's got fonts, brushes, templates, word balloons, everything you need to make comics. If you've seen my free version, which is the Comic Maker Starter Kit, if you join my mailing list, you can get that free. Say you play with that and you like it, and you want more, that's what the toolkit's for. And a lot of people that actually have the starter kit have still went and got the toolkit. So that's kind of a testament to, I guess people are liking it. So, and I appreciate everyone that supported me. And if you still want one, it's available on my website at circworks.com. What about you, Josh? What's going on in your world?
Right. You can check out my comic about faith and mental illness that I handwrite, hand letter, and hand ink, and then hand to you hopefully someday in print. Till that day, you can find it on quarterlystories.com. You can also find it for your Android or iOS device on topis.io just by searching for Quarterly Stories. And while you're there, add it to your library. It helps me get new readers and stuff like that. So. Yeah, that's pretty much where you can find me.
All right, and back to Gerimi. So, Gerimi, what's going on? Anything you want to promote, or what have you been up to?
Well, I have been working on the final issue of my comic book Morningstar, which is Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. And you can find it at my website, jerimi.net. It's GERIMI.net. And from there, there's links to my newsletter where you can see updates, my Patreon. I started running a Patreon, and I actually run the comic book, the early issues, as a webcomic on Patreon. So even people, the older issues, they kind of speed through it and catch up while I'm wrapping up this final issue. And with any big project where you've been working on it for a number of years, you get towards the end, you become real reflective on what you've learned from that project, what your next moves are going to be, where you've been putting your energy, where you want your energy to go. And it's put me in sort of a reflective state just in general about my artwork and comics, and really about my passion for comics. That's, kind of the big thing that, we're going to start off talking about. So.
Yeah, we'll dive into that. I just wanted to kind of bring up something. This is interesting because Josh is like, how many pages away from completing your book are you, Josh?
I think about a page to a page and a half. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you guys are. I mean, I know these are both long-term projects. I'm not sure if I'm caught up on Morningstar or not. I've got to go back and see which issues I have if I need to get any more. Well, it would have been the last time we probably exhibited together.
Yeah, because I missed Phoenix Comic Con this year, so it would have been the year before.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think at that time, I don't believe I had issue 7 now. So issue 6 was the most recent one. So I've got a new issue out, issue 7, and I am working on the 8th and final issue. Okay,
so maybe I'll just wait till you get that, and then I'll order them both at the same time and finish my collection. So I'm looking forward to that. Awesome. Yeah. So it's been a while since we exhibit. I don't want to get too much off topic, but yeah. So I mean, I don't. Are you still? Because you're talking. Well, this might come into the conversation because it was you were talking about how you're kind of reconsidering maybe just doing comics as a passion thing and not really pursuing them so much in a monetary sense. So I don't know. I could be putting words in your mouth. I don't know. So I'll just kind of let you kick it off. What is this new revelation or these? You said you've kind of been reflecting on things after getting so close to finishing your project. So I'll just let you kind of start off with that.
Well, you're not putting words in my mouth at all because I'm of two minds. I'm very split and mulling over the new directions that I could go in. But a big part of it is that I have found that over the past 2 years, conventions have been less profitable for me. And I think that that's something a lot of creators have been talking about. For years during the rise of conventions, people have been talking about convention burnout, convention saturation, peak convention, and the fact that how long can this go on for when there's a convention every weekend? Are people going to get sick of it? Are they using up all the discretionary income that they might use on just 1 or 2 shows? Is that getting diluted across 3 or 4 shows that may come to their region? But I don't put it all just on the nature, the saturation of conventions, because that's still every opportunity someone has to see your work is another opportunity for someone who has never discovered you to pick up your work and buy it, try it out for the first time. And also, in trying to do more conventions, I have been less productive in terms of actually generating artwork. And that's the thing I realized is if I'm not making the comics, if I'm only coming with 1 new book a year, or if I do a show 2 years in a row and I don't have a new issue done, of course my sales are going to be down. That's not on the comics. That's not on the convention scene. That's on me. I have to bring new work and get more work done. So part of it is I've been pulling back on conventions because they've been less profitable just in the past 2 years. So I've definitely saw a rise in the 3 or 4 years before that. And I thought that my convention was on an upward trajectory, which is, that's what we all hope for. But I've been cutting back now. I went from going, trying to do 6 shows a year, 1 every other month, to now doing 4 shows a year. Last year this past year, 2019, I've only had 2 shows on the books. And next year I only have WonderCon, the only convention I have on the books right now. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to add 1 or 2 more. But right now, the goal has been cutting back so that I can focus on actually finishing the final issue, producing, that finished comic. And then I've also been thinking in terms of the profitability, not just about bringing new comics to the show, but I know you guys are familiar with the One Fantastic Week guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been to one of their workshops. The workshops are fantastic. It's well worth it, even though it's a pricey ticket. I believe in a lot of the stuff that they are teaching in terms of how to run your convention business, but a lot of what they're teaching is about producing a lot of work, producing a large body of work, and then seeing what resonates with audiences. It's not necessarily about some magic way to game the system. It's literally just produce work that you care about, share it with people, and see where the Venn diagram is, the overlap between what you care about and what they care about, and then produce more of that. This ties back into doing fewer shows in that I've also, haven't the big problem with comics is that it's one of the most labor-intensive art forms. And so by that standpoint, I'm a little bit torn in terms of, well, do I just double down on what little time that I have and just say, all right, all comics all the time, and just keep producing work, build up a body of work, and then hopefully have more stuff to sell and make revenue down the line? Or do I sort of alternate between, finish up this series and then maybe spend a year where I'm just doing art prints that are in the same genre and related to my comic? But, it seems like the people that have a lot of success in conventions are people that are selling prints and originals. And I'm talking about stuff besides fan art. I mean, I know that fan art has a large following, and I'm not anti-fan art, but I feel like it makes sense to make fan art if it's something that you truly are a fan of, but I'm not interested in making fan art just because it's what sells. I'd much rather make something that I'm really interested in, passionate about, creative about, and I'm fans of different genres. I've got, horror, fantasy stuff in my work. My current series is a supernatural Western, so a lot of my work has sort of supernatural themes in it. And I'm thinking, this is where I get split into 2 minds, is the idea, right now, the comics are not my main income. My main income is my day job in the toy industry. And I'm thinking, in terms of comics as a passion project, if I'm not making large sales at the convention level, where that's not growing to become a main source of revenue for me right now, that I'm torn between saying, well, screw it. If comics are what I want to make, then maybe just make art, or in this case, making comics as if no one's watching. just make whatever the hell I really want to make if it's not important that becomes a source of revenue. That doesn't mean to make art or comics that are intentionally not marketable, but I am trying to say, well, I've got this limited amount of time because I'm not making enough money that it means I can start working part-time in terms of my day job. So do I really focus on just making comics and saying that's my passion, that's what I'm going to spend my time doing, and hopefully eventually it'll become profitable? Or do I look at what I see other artists in the convention scene doing that's more profitable, which is making original art specifically to sell at conventions and treating your booth or your table like it's a small art gallery? And so those are sort of the two things that I've been thinking about, and I kind of go back and forth. I haven't really made my mind completely, but as long-winded as I am, there's a third option. I'm a big fan of that Yogi Berra quote, if there's a fork in the road, take it. And one of the things I've also been considering is not just making artwork that's in the same genre as the type of comics I make, but the fact that I really feel like there's a lot of imagery, just concept sketches, ideas that I've had for Morningstar that I didn't necessarily put into work. I always do a lot of thumbnails for each cover that I do, and I realized that part of the things that I didn't execute well in Morningstar originally was the idea is that the book has 7 archangels in it. There's Lucifer and then 6 other archangels, and it's sort of like they're like the Magnificent Seven. And when I originally set out to do the book, I just decided that I was going to have each cover have a different archangel on it. Lucifer would be on the first one since he's the main character, then Lucifer would be on the final issue. But where I think I fell down on creating the covers is that I didn't design the covers with art prints in mind. And by that, I mean, I feel like if I had sat down and said, all right, if I make this image that's on the cover such a compelling image that somebody who had not read my comic, had no interest in my comic, but just saw it as a print, saw this and said, hey, this is a really cool image of like this winged cowboy fighting demons. I want that as a print. I feel that making the imagery that has that level of strength to it and that level of visual appeal, I would have made more money selling prints because it would be an image I would sell to people who, even if they weren't reading the comic. And I think that the comic would have sold better because people would see that cover and the covers would have been more striking. And so the whole side of prints and originals being more profitable in general because people can do them faster, it got me thinking about my comic covers saying, oh, wait, I should be approaching my covers the way I would approach a fine art print. And I was just thinking of it as showcasing a character on each cover. And me thinking about that has had me rethinking not just how I'm going to do covers in general, but it also had me thinking about the potential that, let's say I wrap up Morningstar and I spend the next year taking all the concept sketches that I thought these are really cool images of the characters that would make good prints, and I spend a year just doing prints of those and selling original art of those pieces. Then when I want to do whatever my follow-up comic book is, before I even start that comic book, maybe I spend a year doing prints of that next project before I've even done the comic. So it's almost like I use the exploration of, let's say, doing a series of like 12 prints, doing 1 print a month. Maybe I'm doing it in digital painting. Maybe I'll get back to painting in acrylics. But using the creation of original arts and prints for a new comic, using that visual development to build awareness for the comic book, to help me flesh out exactly how I want the characters to look within the story, to do some of the visual world building. So using that prints and original art process as a way of visual development for the comic itself, like all those concept sketches that you would do and those character designs that you would do before you would start doing a new comic book series. If you're going to do prints of all these characters, you're still going to have to work out that world and that visual story. And there's a lot of people who do artwork where they aren't even doing a comic, but they're still building a visual world of their own, a visual language, and they're creating characters that are recurring in their paintings and their prints. If you look at somebody like Brahm, who has moved into doing illustrated books, and in addition to all the book covers he's done, and now he's writing his own work to go with his artwork, and he's got characters that are reoccurring in his pieces. So that's something that I'm thinking about in terms of moving into that my next phase of visual development. So that's where I talk about being pulled into different directions. But I mentioned the passion, and that's the problem. The problem is these things sound like good ideas, but in the end, the thing that I want to do the most is just write and draw comics. So that's where I'm sort of torn between what might be potentially a wise way to market and make my work more appealing and to make it more profitable. But, because the comics just take a long time. They take a long time. So, I mean, you guys all know that.
Oh,
yeah. and that's the elephant in the room, is the amount of time and labor intensiveness that this particular art form, compared to other people that are in the same artist alleys with conventions, that their works may not necessarily have. Like, you have people who have built an entire business on making enamel pins and making really cool, unique enamel pins. Like, you see that pin, I'm not even a pin guy, and I'll see some pins, I'm like, that's a badass pin. I want that. I put that on my art bag. All things like from pins to like sets of postcards, and then, again, prints and originals, all things that in the time it takes for me to do one issue of a comic, I could conceivably do several other items. And again, let's also not forget that even if you're selling an indie comic for $5, which, that's pricey for some people, compared to a print that took you a quarter of the time to create or less, that you're selling for $20 to $40, depending on the size of the print, the quality, and the print run. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
There's so there are a couple things I wanted to touch on. The first, I mean, it seems like the idea of selling prints that aren't fan art, that people aren't familiar with, in order to kind of get people, kind of promote the comic, would be a tough sale. But I've kind of seen you do this already, sort of more or less, where I thought one of the brilliant things that you did, and it does, I mean, like you said, it has to be a striking image, and you have a lot of, I mean, the prints, you do sell prints, and they're not fan art, but they attract attention because they're, they just connect with people. And I've seen where you've had the portfolio and people flipping through, and you've kind of interspersed some of your comic book covers, and then as soon as you get to that print, when you're describing the different prints, you get to that, and then you say, yeah, this is for my comic, and then you go right to the comic, and it's just kind of a brilliant way to do that. And I had never seen anyone really do that before. So yeah, that's definitely one thing I wanted to kind of bring up. And the other thing is escaping me right now. There was something that you said that I wanted to come back to.
Well, there are a couple.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh, while I'm thinking.
Okay, so like one was you were talking about like approaching covers differently, like more like art pieces themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a really good way of thinking when it comes to like covers or even interiors. And I think it ties into a little bit of what you were saying at the top, at least, and this is going to reveal very much where I like kind of land on that same conundrum, because I've had a very similar one. I'm of the mindset that because the comics industry is notoriously like not the best paying industry in the world. So even if you make it in comics, like making it in comics compared to any other entertainment industry, like your reward is not as massive.
Yes.
So if you're delving into comics, it's like you kind of should be doing it as a passion project, I think. If and to me, I think if you're in a situation where you're able to make a living as an illustrator or designer doing something else, then when you've got that limited, beautiful window of time to focus on making something that's purely like not consumer driven, that can be your vision kind of come to life. That should be the impetus. And I think that should be the focus. I think all else is kind of distraction. And I do think it's important to market your work and stuff, but you've touched on a couple things. Like one is, you're almost complete with this story arc, right? Like this the full arc. Yeah. Okay. So your return is going to be significantly different when you've got a collected graphic novel to sell and push than it is on a floppy, right?
Oh yeah.
That's good. That's a good start. But the other thing is, let's say you made a bunch of prints and you go to a convention and you make a bunch of money. The time you're doing that, you could be working on the next great story that then you could push at conventions and then really believe what you're pushing. And even if you sell less, I think morally, and I think for that thing we need as creators, I think that would be, this might be terrible advice, but it's like, to me, I tend to side with the idea of, I think that's the point. I think the point is, I don't think, if you're already making your bread and butter through, doing commercial art, doing more commercial art for a convention just doesn't have as much appeal, I think. Whereas doing your own art that's purely yours, and I think that ties into make the covers the best cover you can make the interiors the best interiors you can make, and then regardless of whether they sell, at least you'll be like, this is what I'm capable of when you take the handcuffs off, when you take the reins away, you take away the clients and the over management of the work, and you just let me run free. This is what I can achieve. And I think that's what we all kind of, at least for me, that's what I enjoy about working on personal projects. But it took me a while to get there, because I did chase a lot of different avenues, like doing prints and doing my own illustrations and stuff like that. And a lot of them are more lucrative, but I just tend to think I think you need a little bit of that juxtaposed ideas, because you do need a little bit of wisdom when it comes to marketing and stuff. But at the same time, it's I feel like you know, at your core, which way you go, because it seems to me that's the first thing you arrive at is maybe I should just make as many awesome stories as I can. To me, that sounded not a maybe. I think that's that's the way to do it. And then the other stuff can be maybe make the covers to where you can repurpose them and make a profit from them and stuff. But I don't know if that's a long-winded rant, but that to me really stood out, because it's looking under my face all the time, and I definitely am passionately on one side of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
No, it makes total sense. It's an argument that I have with myself on a daily, if not weekly basis, because the comics are where my passion creatively truly lie.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that part of the thoughts about branching away from comics and more into original art and prints is also the idea of just diversifying one's income in general.
Yeah.
Because I've got having a primary income source that isn't comics is a benefit in the sense that I can just make whatever I want. But I also am not foolish enough to know that in this day and age that you can't take your day job for granted.
100%.
I mean, I'm very lucky that I have a day job that's creative. I know a lot of people that have day job that come home after working construction, and they come home and they're working comics, making comics. But it's knowing that it might be wise simply to have something that's generating more income than just what I'm making from comics right now, that is a creative side hustle. It's never a bad thing to have that.
100%.
And that's the thing. It's almost like really it's having that angel on one shoulder and that devil on the other. The angel on one shoulder is saying, hey, building your art prints and originals into a business, it's still your artwork. It's definitely, you have a lot more creative control than if if I'm just working freelance gigs, it's definitely a lot more creative control than that. So if I can make that into like a decent, side revenue, then, maybe that's worth exploring. And then there's the side of me that has been in the driver's seat for most of the past few years. Because, I mean, really, for most of my career as a creative professional, my freelance gigs and my commissions are just sort of like maybe once or twice a year I'll take a gig. Because I look at it as like working the day job is what frees me up to do that personal art. And I try to take as much advantage of that freedom that having something that steady gives me. So it's like it's torn between, let me just build up another income pillar versus I just want to make comics. Those are two sides that it's really. Yeah, I've spent most of my life knowing that comics are what I want to do and make, and I've always been working on them in some form or background. And it's difficult to ignore the logic of someone that says, hey, if you can build up more of a revenue stream with your personal art, and to be honest, this is why it comes back to prints, is because when I'm at conventions, generally speaking, comics are 2/3 of my sales.
Yeah, of course.
They're about 65% of my sales, and then the other artwork, the prints and sketches are about 35%, and it's a significant enough number that if I stopped doing them, there would be a drop. And I don't necessarily think that, if people don't have prints to buy, they'll just buy more comics, because I didn't always sell prints. When I started doing conventions, I came into the convention scene. Oddly enough, this is the 10-year anniversary of me publishing my first graphic novel.
Oh, nice. Congrats.
So thank you. Thanks. I appreciate that. I had done like some indie comics for some small press companies, like in my teens and early 20s. But the comic that I actually self-published a decade ago, I spent 5 years while I was working at a previous toy company. I spent 5 years just working on that comic. And when I started doing conventions, I brought a fully formed graphic novel. I think the only thing I maybe had in a few years before that was I might have shown up with an ash can of like the first 30 pages. But basically, when I started doing conventions in earnest, I was doing it with this graphic novel that I showed up with just this book. And it sold okay, but I was like, I'm really not making that much at shows. So let me start bringing some prints. And I kind of messed around with prints, different print sizes, and some weren't selling. And I didn't, some of them it was the content, some of it was the fact that I didn't have the print size. And eventually I started doing like the 11 by 17 prints that we see most comic creators selling when they are selling prints. And then me actually getting artwork that kind of fit more into that supernatural, creepy, sexy genre that a lot of my artwork falls into. And that's when the prints started selling. But, point being is that it went from just the income that I was making with just comics to, when I put out a new comic, when I finished the graphic novel, I started doing the first issue of the new series, the one that I'm wrapping up now. Yeah, my sales went up. And then as I released each new comic, the sales went up. But also when I was doing the prints, the sales went up as well. But the difference being is that, again, the prints can be added much quicker. And I've also found that when I came with the same prints like 2 or 3 years in a row, the print sales would stagnate, plateau a little bit. But if I were to just crank out, like let's say I spent a couple months and just cranked out like 3 or 4 new prints for a convention before the convention season, I would notice a boost in my income. The same way I would notice a boost if I dropped a new issue. But that new issue, instead of being a couple of months, would take half a year for me to finish.
Yeah.
It's funny, Josh, that your comics are called quarterly stories, because my goal has always been to publish an issue a quarter.
Yeah.
And the closest I've ever gotten was 2.5 issues in 1 year. That's the absolute best I have done, speed-wise.
So far, I've managed to graphic novel in what looks like probably about 5 years. So, but that is the goal. Like eventually I'd like it to be quarterly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, when I started comics, I kind of thought to myself, oh, if I do 4 issues a year, 4 issues is a trade. So I thought to myself, if I can put out 4 issues every year, but I thought after I published my first graphic novel, I was naive enough to believe, well, I'll put out a graphic novel, 4 issues each year, and at the end of the year, I'll put out a trade, and after 5 years, I'll have 5 trades. At that point, I'll have enough of a body of work that I can look at try to get into comic book shops more seriously. Because my first book, I did actually get into Diamond. And, I mean, it sold at sort of like the lowest level to have barely made the sales cut, but it got in the comic shops, and it sold okay. But the reason why I haven't pushed the Western that I'm doing at comic book shops is because of the speed at which I'm publishing it. The fact that I can't predictably tell retailers and Diamond, my book will be out at this frequency. Even if it's quarterly, if you can come to retailers and say, look, I'm going to publish a book every 3 months, I'm going to be on the shelves. If you can stick to that and the book is quality and there's an audience for it, for as much as superheroes dominate the industry, there's a lot of great retailers out there that want to support cool indie books. Yeah. But that's the problem, is that I haven't been able to stick with that consistency of speed. Yeah. And until I could hit that speed, I've been real hesitant. Like, I've been fortunate enough that in the convention circuit, I've met retailers that said, I like this book, I'd like to carry some for my shop, and I'll sell them at like a wholesale discount. Like, yes, please, I'm glad to have this in your shops, and I'll promote them on my website. But that said, that's only a few shops here and there. For the most part, the idea of trying to go to Diamond and saying, yeah, so I got this issue out, and I'll have another one about 6 months, 9 months. Well, I'll let you know when it's ready. That's not going to fly. It's just it's not. And that's where the whole idea of like, let's say I've got a body of like 5 graphic novels, that's the point where you could, in theory, sell a graphic novel into Diamond, and then like, let's say you've just been selling them. This was my fantasy plan when I first started publishing comics. Sell my books just at conventions and on my website until like 5 years in, I've got 5 trades. Then the 6th year, I solicit the first trade to Diamond. Then 3 months later, I solicit the next trade. Then 3 months later, I solicit the 3rd trade and the 4th trade. And then hopefully by the following year, I've still got 1 more trade to solicit. And then I've got a buffer where I can slow down now, and I'm still putting out, let's say I'm still doing something, maybe not quite the breakneck speed of like 4 issues a year, but something still like around 3 to 4 issues a year. And now I've got something where if I've still got a body of work on the shelves, I might say, all right, I'm going to work until I've got 4 issues done, then do it Hellboy style where I just release the series monthly. But every time if I do that every other year, then that will spawn people reordering the existing previous books. So then it's almost like you've got a section on the bookshelf where you've got an existing thing, and every time somebody buys one, say, oh, he's got this other book and these other books. And if your work has built up an audience over those years, the theory is that, every time you release a new book, the backlist sells. Yep. Problem is, I'm 10 years in, my backlist is 1 completed graphic novel. I've got a 4-issue trade that collects the first 4 issues of Morningstar. Nice. So I've got 2 trades. And I've got 3 issues, and I'm working on the 4th issue that will make up that 2nd trade. So at the end after a decade, I'm going to have 3 trades instead of 5 trades in 5 years. So, that speed comes back to the whole thing of maybe doing prints and original art because it's faster. But again, it's that ping pong match, because like you said, you guys can hear it in my voice. All I really want to do is make comics.
Well, and then the other question is like, is that just the illusion of speed though? Because will that get you any closer to 5 trades doing a bunch of prints? Does that make sense?
No, it makes complete sense. And no, it would not.
Because it sounds like it would get you further from your goal, and maybe like in the short run, like a little more income at conventions, which is like, I mean, I don't think we're going to be, at least most people I know, like, it's not like you're going to pull like Well, I don't know. I guess it's possible, but it'd be hard to pull like a whole year's income at like a couple conventions, you know? So it's like, if it's, I don't know. I guess I'd more just try to figure out what the priority is. Like, is the priority to like clean up at conventions, or is it to like push your books and try to get that snowball you're talking about, where you have like a shelf and you have people who are coming to you for your work? It's tough because I'm in it about as long, and I mean it is weird and hard to kind of figure out what avenue to take. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, with this, I've even considered the idea of like self-distroing, like on weekends, going to different comic shops like every single weekend for the year, hit like 2 different comic shops all throughout California, and then just sell direct. Because I've been in Diamond too, and it's like you see the sales stats and they're okay, but they're not like it seems like a lot because you're sending out orders, but most of the orders the shops are placing aren't like 200 copies of this. It's like, 3 to Michigan to this one city, 4 to this one shop. It's in small quantities. It's just a lot of small quantities. I was thinking like of even doing that direct, just one-on-one, and then building those relationships with each shop individually. And then conventioning, I don't know, because you might have dissuaded me through this from doing, but my goal is to like try to take away prints so that it's focused on the books, because the only times I've done conventions before, I've usually sold okay with books, but usually it's the prints and all the other stuff that sells well. But then I kind of think of it like, well, if I'm a retailer and I'm like, maybe there's a benefit to being like in and out and being like, no, this is the order. It's like a limited order. That's what we got. But it's really good what we've got. It's just like 5 things, I don't know. But now I'm wondering if that's a good idea. It's interesting though, hearing I like hearing your dilemma on it and kind of split thoughts on it, because it definitely heightens a lot of what my own are, like in just hearing it, because I'm like, dude, it is a tough call, Even with this book, I've been wondering, like, should I make prints? But then the time I'm making those prints, couldn't I be working on the next book?
That's always the trade-off in terms of how you want to, time is the only real asset it's the real asset that we have.
Yeah.
And you're always, time strapped. There's so many things you can do with that time that could generate, yes, it can generate money, but it can also generate fulfillment. And that's the other thing, is like, well, what actually do you enjoy the most? Because it's not like I don't enjoy doing prints and doing original arts and doing original art. I've been at conventions and, like Scott and I were talking about earlier, when I have people like flipping through my work, looking at the prints that, I've usually got a little anecdote about where I got the idea for this piece, or something that inspired that piece, or it relates to them, and I personally like to draw people in and just talk about the work, not necessarily here's my pitch about this print and why it looks good on your wall, but just, this is how it related to my life, or what do you think about it, or what does it remind you about, and just having conversations like that. But the fact that I enjoy making comics the most, it doesn't necessarily mean that print process is not unenjoyable for me. It's not like it definitely doesn't feel like a grind. And to be honest, the fact that I can do better work when I'm doing a cover or a print, because sometimes I'll be working on a comics page and I will sit there and I will say, I know that this page is not as good as it can be. But I also know that most of the people reading this aren't going to notice the things that bother me. Or look at it this way. This is the thing that all of us can relate to. No one can see the comic page in my head. There's a comic page in my head that is an Alex Toth Eisner Award-winning genius page. And every page of my comic in my mind has the potential to be that page. But no one else can see that page. They just see a page like, oh, that's cool. And I like this character and this story. I see what this. Oh, that was a cool scene there. And I like the way this panel flows into that panel. That's if they're even breaking it down to that level, as opposed to just reading the story, flipping through like, Yeah, I like this comic. They may not necessarily even be noticing like little ways in which I really busted my ass to make the composition mirror something that happened 3 pages ago.
Oh yeah.
Or, making sure that I'll set up something in the background that's going to pay off a few more pages down the line, or even the next issue down the line. But yeah, that all of that stuff that in my head could be perfect. When you're doing a print, you can labor on those things because it's just one image. With a comic, at a certain point, you have to say, all right, the amount of time I have spent on this page in comparison to how long the reader is going to spend on it, I really need to wrap up this page. And again, there are some people who will like you look at somebody like Travis Ture, who he may spend a year or 2 on a book. When he finishes that book, it's like a beautiful painting. That book is like a Rubens or a Rembrandt. So it's just a matter of where do you want to make each comic page a masterpiece? Because there are artists who do it. Like you look at somebody like, say, Charles Burns. Yeah, his books, like each page looks like a masterpiece to me.
Yeah, but then you look at what's the big one he just put out a couple years ago? It's like
X'd Out?
Sorry, no, the Charles Burns, right?
Yeah.
There's one about it's like a high school Blacked Out.
Black
Yeah.
Hole. Well, the Black Hole is the one with
Black
the
Hole,
kids with
that's
the
it.
Okay.
Yeah. So Black Hole, that was 14 to 15 years or something.
Well, at the rate I'm going, that's the point.
Yeah, and I mean, when he started the book, he even did a little self-portrait as an homage to himself, and then at the end, when he completed it, he thought it would be funny to do a self-portrait after. So it's you literally see 15 years of age just hit this guy for a fairly quick read, even though it's these masterfully perfect pages, So yeah, that is something to consider, it's hard to know. Because then again, I look at those books and I'm I want to make those books. I think that's part of why I don't mind that this thing's been taking about 5 years, because I'm I want it to be there. Now, if it's there or not, that's up to most people. But I'm trying, which is a weird thing. It's a newer thing because I've tried to gun through graphic novels and stuff before and never been happy with the results. I don't know. It's a weird thing, but it is a give and take, because in reality, there is something interesting that happens to, I think, all of us when you finish that first, especially floppy, and you've maybe spent 6 months, 8 months on it's 24 pages to give it to a friend to look at, and they're just oh, that's pretty cool. And it's maybe a 10-minute read for them. There is something kind of, I think, important about that moment, because it's realizing not everybody's going to sit and go oh, I love what you did with panel 3 on page 10, yeah, that's interesting. It's a hard balance,
Scott, I saw you refreshed. Is there any comments in the
chat? So there's a question for you. I don't know if you're ready to answer. We were talking about how long you've been working on this, but I don't know if you have a plan for the future. Robert Johnson wants to know, what does a 5-year plan look like, Jeremy?
Oh, hey, Robert. Good to see you. He's got some good questions. I see him on my live stream every once in a while. So thanks for popping in. The 5-year plan is still in flux. There's a loose 5-year plan. Hang on a sec. One of my cats is about to step on my keyboard, so I just need to find a place to keep her out of trouble. Morningstar, my plan is to finish it hopefully by the end of 2019, early 2020. But after that, I have a book that I've been planning to write about the outlining process. And it's based on a YouTube video that I posted that just basically walks people through how I wrote the first issue of Morningstar. And it's probably one of my most popular YouTube videos. So I thought, well, why don't I actually take my process and put it down in book format, and then I was going to supplement it with basically all of the thumbnails and all of my script, my character sketches that went into making the first issue of Morningstar, because I realized there was a point when I was a couple issues in to the comic and I was looking at my rough pencils, my thumbnails, and if you took all of the drawings and sketches that went into making that first 24-page issue, there was probably about 100 pages worth of just artwork material. And I thought, I wonder what it'd be like to make like a director's cut that's just, it's all behind the scenes. It's like this is everything that went into the book, into that comic. And I've been thinking about doing that as a side project. But when this YouTube video, kind of took off in popularity, I thought that would be a good supplement, is to basically to show this is how I outline a comic. And then this is how I applied my outlining process. And I say that specifically about outlining as opposed to writing comics, because I think a lot of people are like, I have an idea for a story. I want to do a comic. I've got an idea. What's next? I think that's the thing a lot of people struggle with. And I know that, I listen to a lot of podcasts about the writing process, some in terms of both writing prose and screenwriting. And there's plotters and there's pantsers. Plotters, meaning they work out the plot first and the actual story structure, and then they sort of flesh it out. And then the pantsers are people who write by the seat of their pants. And I can see the benefits of just starting with, page 1, scene 1, and just saying, this is what happens next, this is what happens next, this is what happens next. And the strengths of writing by the seat of your pants is that it's a lot more surprising. If you don't know what's coming next, your reader doesn't know what's coming next either. So I understand the logic of that. And, people finding that, I understand people finding outlining, feeling like it's boring and feeling like it's schoolwork. Reminding them like when they had to do reports in school and they have to, do all their outlines and such. That said, one, I've tried writing by the seat of my pants a couple of times and it just didn't work for me.
Word.
I don't. Right. Yeah. So I always make it clear that I don't hate on writing by the seat of your pants. I see the logic of it. I see the joy of it. I see the benefit of it. And I've tried it and crashed and burned enough times that even on this last issue of Morningstar, I jumped to my thumbnails too soon because I realized even though I had done my outline, I didn't do like actual breakdowns of page by page. And I didn't do my outline of what happens on a panel by panel basis. And it bit me in the ass and it made the thumbnails take twice as long as they should have. And I should know better because I'm planning to write a book about not doing what I did. So if anything, this reinforced it. But I've actually found that I really enjoy thumbnailing. I really enjoy thumbnailing too, but I really enjoy outlining. And my whole approach to outlining has come from the fact that I've been taking figure drawing classes on a weekly basis for well over 10 years now. It's something that I look at just sort of like, it's like, I don't look at it figure drawing and actually drawing anatomy. I don't look at it as a skill that you learn so much as a muscle you exercise. The more you do it, the stronger you get, the less you do it, the weaker you get, but you're never done. Mm-hmm. And what I've realized after I finished my first graphic novel and when I started my next one was that the amount of time that I've spent working on learning how to draw as an artist, because really I've been learning since I was a child. When you think about it, we all started drawing. That it wasn't education, it wasn't formalized, but from the moment I started drawing as a child and being creative, that's all fed into where I'm at now. Every crayon sketch that I did in my brother's composition books when I was a little kid, every art project I had in elementary school, every project I turned in for AP art classes when I was in high school, all of it has fed in some way and has informed me just my learning process. And I realized I have not spent nearly as long learning how to write as I have learning how to draw. Yeah. But more importantly, in relating to, this is a really long answer to that 5-year plan. I got to bring it back to the 5-year plan. I'm the worst at long-winded answers because I will tie it back in, but I do it like it's like some weird like Seinfeld comedy routine where 2 hours later I tap back into like the box of Cheerios or something.
Believe me, you're among you're among similar-minded people with like we have long-winded ways of getting our points too. So don't worry, you're among company. So yeah.
But
so you do drawing classes to kind of sharpen your drawing skills, and you were realizing like, oh, okay, like the writing classes, like you need to like.
I need to work at the craft of writing
just
as hard as I've been working at the craft of drawing if I want them to be any good. I mean, there's comic artists who also want to write and they can tell a story visually, but it might not necessarily be as good as, say, like Alan Moore or Warren Ellis or Brian Michael Bendis. Now, mind you, those are high bars to put yourself. Well, I want to be as good as the best writers in comics, but you got to aim high in order to do something that doesn't suck. You got to shoot way over your head just to get out of mediocrity.
Yeah, I relate to that a ton. Like I had a thing where like I did the seat of my pants. So that was the last graphic novel I completed, and I'm not even pursuing publishing for a lot of the reasons. Like there's some things I liked about it that were surprising and interesting, and I was writing it as I went while I was drawing it, but the downside is there's a ton of plot holes. There's a lot of things that don't make any sense. There's all the weaknesses of the seat of your pants type of writing. I had this realization when I was getting back into comics, and I was like, kind of similar to the thing I was talking about where I was like, I'm kind of tired of just making pages like I would make if I were on the clock. I want to make the best pages I can make. I want to make the best story I can make. But then I had a similar realization where I was like, wait, I've known how to write. Like you learn how to write in school, you when you're writing like an essay or something, you have somebody else look at it, read through it, like, the weaknesses on it, like, the strengths and stuff. And I was like, I do that with my art. Like if I do rough pencils or whatever, I'll show it to somebody I respect and they'll give me a critique and I'll fix stuff. And I'm like, I don't do that with my writing for comics for some reason. And I haven't been scripting things out. And that's weird because I know, like, I've been taught, like, these things get better with each draft. And, yet I'm just going, like, draft one and then to the comic. And, oh, yeah, plot structure. Like, that would be good to maybe map out my story structure first. Do all the, like, basic, like, annoying stuff if I want to make a good story. And so it was a similar thing where it was, like, I started applying that, and then suddenly, like, my writing got a lot better, and it's a little easier to work on my comics, so I don't feel like I'm knee-deep in, like, the deep end of a pool that I have no idea where I'm at and how I'm going to wrap it up. It's like, oh, no, I know exactly where I'm at on the arc. I know exactly, like, when I'm putting in little hints for, like, the future and where it's going to go, I know exactly what I'm doing with it. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier. So it's kind of like, I don't know, I've known illustrators who try to do illustrations or graphic designs without roughs, and the end product sometimes works, but I always do roughs because, like, all it takes is one or two that don't work, and then you're like, yeah, I should probably do a rough first. Mm-hmm. So I think it's similar with plot. That's kind of cool. That's cool that you had that kind of happen. But I think it's a good realization to have. It helps.
Yeah, well, I mean, similar to you, it came from trying it and it not working. It came from trying it and failing, and then realizing, oh wait, I have to do it this other way. And that's not to say that there aren't great comic creators out there. I mean, Mobius, he's a genius. From what I heard with Airtight Garage, he just started at page 1 and made the whole thing up as he went along.
Yeah, there's tales that Chris Ware, like, writes a page at a time, and I'm like, how do you do that? Because his stories are really succinct and brilliant, but I don't know, it doesn't work for me.
Well, I think that as we all create, our creative process grows and changes, and it's not necessarily, oh, I've got the whole story laid out in my head, so I don't need to write the outline. I think it's more of, some people get better at connecting the dots as the dots lay out before them.
That makes sense.
It doesn't necessarily mean, because for me, the point of doing a book about outlining is not to poo-poo writing by the seat of their pants. It's for people that have, because I think there's people who sit there that they try outlining and they're bored, they don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
They try writing by the seat of their pants and it doesn't make any sense. So my whole thought is, okay, I found a way to just make the outlining as painless as possible. In my mind, outlining is actually fun. Yeah. But for somebody who really, really hates outlining, I feel like I found a way, and if you just go onto my YouTube channel, if someone were to just search the channel for outlining, that video will probably be the first one that comes up. I've broken it down to just a pretty simple process, and from there, it's like it's yours to win or lose if you want to build on top of that framework and that structure. But that's the thing, is just starting with a simple framework and a simple structure. But moving away from outlining, the 5-year plan is wrap up Morningstar, do this book on outlining, then start my next comic. And like I mentioned before about the idea of visual development, the idea I was thinking is that I have an idea for one book. I have 2 different comics that I'm going back and forth between debating on. One is a reimagining of a Greek myth. The other is a sequel to the first graphic novel I did. Because a lot of people have asked me, well, what happens next? Because even though my first graphic novel was written to be standalone, I end things in such a way that, like, the main character is dropped into a new situation at the end of the story, where it's like, well, what is his life now? And if people have asked me about it, then I'm considering doing that as another potential project. So, but with either one of these projects, the thing I had mentioned earlier about using original art and prints as a way of visually developing it.
Yeah.
My thoughts are, let's say that the Greek myth thing would probably be like similar in length to Morningstar, 6 to 8 issues. And the idea of what if I were to actually draw the covers for all of these issues before I even started thumbnailing the comic. So what if, almost like, here's interesting. Okay, how I got to this whole point where I mentioned before about the about covers and prints as visual development for the world building is from Pixar.
Yeah.
Because when I was doing the cover for issue 7 of Morningstar, I was having a really hard time with the color scheme. My comics are black and white. Even though I do prints that are in color, I don't think that color is necessarily my strong point. I can do artwork in color, but I have to work at it to really make it work.
Yeah.
It doesn't come naturally, mainly because I don't do it that often. But one of the things that I looked at for inspiration was I ordered a book called The Art of Pixar. And what that book has is it has all of the color scripts for all of the Pixar movies from Toy Story all the way up through, I think, like Cars 2 and Toy Story 3. I don't think I think it goes everything up to like Incredibles 2. Like it doesn't have Incredibles 2 in there, and I think whatever movie Cars released before that. But it's got like Cars 1 and 2, Toy Story 1, 2, and 3. I think Ratatouille. And what the color scripts are, I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but what the color scripts are they're mood boards. They're images. They're like visual dev pieces. They're paintings that basically tell the mood of the whole story. Like if you were to work out the entire film in just like, let's say 40 panels that aren't actual storyboards in the sense that it goes from this action to this action to this action, but they're visual development that creates the mood of that scene and that moment in the story. And maybe it has characters in it, maybe it's just environmental pieces, but you can look at like the whole film across like, let's say like 4 pages of this large art book. Like if you look across 4 pages, it just tells you the whole story in terms of color and mood and scene and composition.
Yeah. And I think for anybody who's unfamiliar with like mood boards and stuff, I've talked about Mary Blair a bunch on here, and one of the reasons Mary Blair's like so respected in the animation industry is like her moods that she set for like Cinderella, for instance. If you just look at like, she'd do a single painting that was just like a visual cue for all of the lighting, the color schemes, and she'd pick these really absurd, weird colors that like shouldn't work and set this perfect mood, and did that for that entire film. So then like when you're watching that film and there's these weird off color choices that are like almost like split complements and like analogous palettes that just shouldn't really be analogous, like, but somehow she kind of makes them work. And then you see it like in action, and it fits to a T, and it's this beautiful thing. But it all comes from like these splashes of color and just kind of a rough like working out of like what the mood and the look is going to be. And I think that's kind of exciting to think about with a comic, because I've never approached making a comic like that, like working out the mood first. Like I've done character studies and stuff, but I've never. That's interesting. So that's kind of one of the things you're thinking, is to kind of build that for a future project. Like,
yes. Now imagine doing those, but knowing that those mood boards are going to do double duty as prints. See,
Yeah.
now the whole thing of like, see, in that sense, that's what I was trying to say. So in a strange way, what I'm trying to do is marry the comics and the prints, make the prints more of a part of the visual development of the comics. Literally, that's what I'm thinking about for the next thing. Is like, let's say you've got a comic, you haven't even started yet, but before you even do it, you do these mood pieces, and these mood pieces, maybe I end up changing them for the actual final covers. But my goal is starting out saying, using the covers as a process for helping me flesh out the actual story. Like, let's say I'm doing these pieces before I've even started my outline. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So whether I end up using them for the final covers or not, they become prints that I can sell. They can start building awareness for the project before it's launched. Even though I don't really worry about it too much, people worry about their ideas being stolen by somebody. A great way to keep someone from stealing your idea is to just do pieces of your idea and sell those pieces. Then you've put your work out there. You've state claimed your project.
Yeah, the easiest way to get your idea stolen is to do nothing with it, and then someone will beat you to it, because ideas are not original. So it's happened to the best of us. I'll a case in point, like, I had this idea for years of a kids book I really wanted to do, and I used to joke with my wife about it because she worked in kids books, and I always joke, like, if I ever did a kids book, it'd be like a little baby who gets a mustache and then like gets accepted as an adult. And I swear it was like 4 years ago, I go to a Barnes & Noble and there's a book on the shelf called Mustache Baby. I was like, I've talked about that for 10 years and somebody beat me to it. My fault for not having done that. You know what I mean? Because I'm probably not the only person who had that idea to begin with. It's just somebody did something with it. That's the way it goes, Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm a little woo-woo. I honestly believe that, kind of that Jungian, that Carl Jung, that Jungian idea of the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Like that all people are sort of connected in some way subconsciously. And that's where you talk about things being in the zeitgeist, whether it be like violence in gaming or, other things coming up, like topics that people are excited about, whether they're hot button topics or just a trend or a meme, or like for 1 year, everyone's selling like artwork that has owls on it. Why? I don't know. But that idea that we're all pulling from the same pool, we all live on the same planet.
Yep.
And if you've got an idea, someone else has the same thing rattling around their subconscious. And on one hand, it sucks that someone else beats you to that idea. But on the other hand, let me put it this way. The Walking Dead was not the first comic book about people trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic zombie world.
100%, yeah.
Robert Kirkman just did it remarkably well. Yeah. And that said, it's not like it's the last word in zombie comics, because zombie comics have continued to come out since then. And even that movie Zombieland, which I really loved, Zombieland has a sequel coming out. We're living in a post-Walking Dead world of zombies, and there's still more people doing new zombie stories and new takes on it. So, I mean, hell, maybe there's a world for goatee baby, you know?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I mean, that comes to the thing of like, it's one thing for a person to not do an idea because someone beats them to a punch. It's another thing to say there's a lot of different iterations to this concept. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat. And like, the whole thing, if you ask, 10 different artists to draw you a vampire, you're going to get 10 very different vampire illustrations.
Oh, yeah.
Because we all have different concepts and ideas. Some might do like a really cutesy, vampire that looks like kind of like a little chibi character. Somebody might do something that looks like a manga vampire or something out of like the Netflix Castlevania cartoon. Somebody might do a really beautifully rendered, so it's like an oil painting like a Rembrandt. Somebody might do like a really hatched like Franklin Booth or a Bertie Wrightson vampire. There's all different ways to do that, and I think that that's not just true of artistic styles, but it's also true in terms of story execution.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because I think if someone's too fragile about sort of being original with their story, I think a lot of the time that can inhibit any creativity at all, because like, once again, like, you kind of doing the act of making it is usually going to make it original enough, and everything's kind of riffing on something else. A perfect example too, like Toy Story, right? Like, was that the first story about toys coming to life in a kid's room? No, not at all. Like, that's been told as long as there are toys, and yet it's the way they executed that made it so unique and like so successful. So yeah.
Or even The Young and the Dead on the zombie thing. There we go, a new take on the zombie genre.
Exactly. A good take on the zombie genre, and people should order that after they've ordered the comic makers starter kits.
Yeah, I've seen a couple other people do a take with kids fight. I think there was one that was something like, I forgot what it was, like zombies versus scouts or Boy Scouts or something like that. Mm-hmm. There's a few different ones where it's kids fighting zombies. Somebody had mentioned another one. I think there's a game or something. But like you guys said, I mean, everyone's going to tell their story differently. So don't really concern yourself if somebody kind of, is doing a similar idea that you are, because you tell that story differently.
And the great thing is, if you're putting out concept art and like kind of building it as you're thinking of it, then it'll be pretty clear if it's being ripped off, during the process. So once again, it's like you're in a better scenario doing that than if you don't, and then somebody beats you to the punch, and then it's like, you might end up in one of those Thief and the Cobbler kind of scenarios where it's like Aladdin was a ripoff of Thief and the Cobbler, but Thief and the Cobbler came out after Aladdin. So then when it came out, everybody was like, what's this Aladdin ripoff? It's possible to happen if it's delayed, so yeah.
Yeah, so here's sort of a question. So we were talking about, doing your comic for passion, not focusing so much on, the monetary aspects of that. But obviously it's not like you're not going to try to sell it. You're just doing it for yourself in a vacuum and everything. Because you had mentioned something about no one seeing it, but you have a YouTube channel and everything. Mm-hmm. So obviously you're going to be posting stuff. So where's that line as far as what makes something that you're not really pursuing for necessarily to earn money off of when you probably eventually are, and where's the line between kind of doing it for yourself but still sharing it? Does that make sense? Do you get where I'm coming from?
It makes sense.
You just don't have an answer.
it's an amorphous challenge, and I mean, when we even first started talking about it, I was vague about it because as this conversation has shown, I'm of two minds on the topic. And I think part of that is because somebody can do something purely for passion and it ends up being remarkably profitable, and someone can also do something purely because this is what sells, and then they're like, not your version. You can't really game the system. And I think part of it is that what I've seen just in terms of watching other creators on the convention circuit creating artwork, people that maybe I don't see them at conventions, but seeing people on YouTube channels or seeing them online, people I follow on Instagram, artists that seem to get creative freedom, get it by producing the most work possible. And in terms of me and the going back and forth between just sticking with comics and sticking with it because it's the passion, it comes back to that, the time it takes to make comics versus the time it takes to make individual pieces of artwork. I'm not sure if there really is it's difficult to answer, because taking the time to make prints, if in the long run, the thing that, because there's no crystal ball, in the long run, if what really makes people follow my work and develops me enough of a readership and an audience that I can move to spending a larger part of my day making comics, if the only thing that gets me to that road is making comics, then any other art I make will be a waste of time and will take time away from that. That said, let's say that, as much as I love my day job, what if my day job were staying home, making prints, doing a convention once a month, once every other month, and I still had the same amount of time to make personal artwork, but I also didn't have the commute that I have. So I would get 2 hours a day back, and I just used those 2 hours a day. That's 2 more hours of drawing comics than I was making before. Because right now, really, my comics productivity is pretty much like during my lunch break, I work on my comics, and then I get maybe an hour, if I'm lucky, in the evenings, and then whatever I can squeeze out on the weekends, a few hours on Saturday, a few hours on Sunday. So that's part of the reason why it's so incredibly slow. And there's no way to know whether anything other than making comics is going to lead to me having more time to make comics. There's no crystal ball.
Yeah, I mean, I can say from like my experience, like I kind of had a weird scenario where I went backwards from where a lot of people did, because I had kind of built up a freelance career where I worked from home, and like that was it. And I was like still like the primary income earner in my relationship and stuff, and like, but I built the whole thing myself and did it for like 15 years, selling primarily a lot of my own stuff, where it was just like shirts that were designs that I came up with from nothing, and like sold to different companies, and had built that to the point where people were hiring me to like, hey, do the Josh Kemble style thing on this shirt and come up with your own concept and stuff. I did that for a long time. And part of why I did that instead of in-house work was this idea that I don't want to work in-house because I want time to work on my comics. What's weird was the whole time I was doing that, I had to spend so much time building my business and retaining clients. And then because I'm a workaholic, I never got good at turning down clients, because all it takes is like one famine year as a freelancer, and you're like, well, never mind. Like I'm every client I get. So it was just this loop of working and realizing like I hadn't touched my comics. And so part of why I took a day job was, by that point, I luckily was able to get like an art director position, because I had built up a lot of stuff and been in design annuals and stuff like that. But it's like part of why I took that was because I was like, at least if there's predictable hours, I know like what my 1 hour window is, because I'm in a similar boat where I have a super long commute. But I do know like when I get home at this specific time, I've got like an hour and a half window to work on my own stuff. And I know that on the weekends, I'm going to have so much time to work on my stuff. Because when I was freelance, I didn't really necessarily have weekends. Like I could have weekends. It could also be a Monday, Tuesday off. It could also be like a Friday, because it just depended on like turnaround and fulfillment and stuff for like my own products too. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, I've met and I've had friends who are like had a lot more success doing that kind of thing and ended up with a little more time to kind of work on their own stuff. But I do kind of think it might be one of those grass is greener scenarios where, like, I think the reality is with building your own personal work, I don't know if there is that magic window of time. Because like I keep, and actually we got to talk after this about NCS, because if you're in the area and you're not in the NCS, we got to get you in the NCS because it's awesome.
I am not in the NCS. I think I've actually had the application and I just never got around to filling it out. And I know I should. NCS, and then also what's the other organization? CAPS.
CAPS, yeah, I'm still not in CAPS, but we'll get you to like one of the NCS meetings coming up just to get a feel for it and see if it's something you want to do. This is good.
I've heard great things about it.
Yeah, it's fun. It's inspiring. But the cool thing is there's guys in the NCS who've like directed Disney films and stuff, and you talk to them and they're like, yeah, I want to work on my own thing. And it's like it's an across the board struggle to kind of build those things and find the time. So it's like, I don't know. Because I also, like you, think maybe there is like something where there's more time for it, but I don't know. Having been on kind of both sides of the fence, I'm like, I don't know if there is more time.
There's no time. You know what? The more you talk about it, I mean, I've worked in-house for most of my creative career. Like I mentioned it earlier, is simply so that when I got off the clock, my time was mine, and I spent it making comics. But that said, it just, you're right. The grass is always greener. And it's funny when you mentioned the thing about guys working at Disney wanting to do their own thing, because at the toy company that I was at before this, I co-created a cartoon series. And it was a situation where it was not because I was some young creative genius. I was in the right place at the right time. The owner of the company was a risk taker and was willing to give me a chance to run with something. And I definitely didn't create it by myself. It was myself, another product designer, and a copywriter. And I sort of started with the original seed of the idea for the story based on toys that the product designer designed. And we worked on the whole thing. We got to work with a great story editor. This guy, Bob Forward, he started out as a storyboard artist on He-Man years ago, but he's worked in animation on the writing side for years.
Nice.
Worked on Transformers. I can't remember if it was Beast Wars or Beast Masters. It was one of the Beast versions, but he was a great guy, and he kind of shepherded us through working on the whole process. But at the time I was working on this cartoon series, I was working on the cartoon series. I still had design duties at the toy company on top of this. And then I would come home and be like, I still am going to spend an hour or two working on my comic. And that's when I knew that I really, really, really loved comics, because I'm working on a cartoon series for a toy company. And I'm like, how that I had no business working on. I can't state that strongly enough. It's not that I'm untalented, but I think that just from the experience of going through that first series, I could have made the same show 10 times better by what I learned from working on that one season. But unfortunately, we only got one season for the show. But even getting to do that, I was like, and I think that also made me not as eager to pursue working in animation full time, because I realized if I'm working on somebody else's project, I'm always going to want to do my own thing on the side.
100%.
And it's always, for the most part, I think throughout most of my professional career, it's been about being protective of that personal time and being kind of pleasantly defensive about it.
Yeah, no, I 100% get that, because like I think that I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think like there's a certain personality of artists and a lot of artists, I think more artists than let on to it, that really need to be making their own thing in order to have like sanity. And it doesn't matter what level they're at. It's just like, I think there's something about that expression, being your own, that is like insanely addictive and almost necessary, and even necessary for the stuff, like for the commercial stuff. Because it's like, for the commercial stuff, you got to feel it and have passion. But if you're not feeling it with your own art and having passion with your own art, it's like that kind of starts infecting the commercial stuff too, where it's like the commercial stuff starts coming out dead and uninterested because you're not exploring and kind of pushing the boundaries in your own work. So I think that's interesting and cool that you had that experience too. Although it is kind of disappointing because you do kind of hope there will be this thing where you're like, you know, I always joke like comics are a wonderful thing, and I love comics, but I always feel like when I try to get artist friends I know to really tackle, like who wanted to do comics, to really get into it and do them, I feel like on one part, like that's a good thing that I'm talking them into doing comics. On another part, I feel a little bit like a drug dealer. I'm like, it's really good, man. You got to join us. You got to join us. Do this thing that we all do. I don't know. But anyhow.
And you go broke just like you would if you get hooked on drugs.
I am quite the opposite with my artistic friends. If they ask me, hey, should I do a comic book? And I say, only if you absolutely cannot not do it.
Yeah.
Because I've tried. You know what? That's an interesting thing. I tried to not go into comics in the sense that when I was in college, I realized that, okay, I was in college in the 90s, in the late 90s. And I realized I was a fine art major. And I knew that I wanted to be a comic book creator. But by the time, like halfway through, I was really thinking about what I was going to be doing when I finished school. And I thought about the fact that, let's say that Marvel Comics published 100 titles a month, which they don't. Seems like that sometimes, but they don't. Let's say DC Comics published 100 books every month. And then let's say if you took Dark Horse, Image, and all the indie comics together and rounded them up, and let's say that together all those companies put out 300 books a month, that would be 500 monthly comic book titles. That's being very generous. For as thick as the previous catalog is, there's not 500 books in there, monthly titles coming out.
Yeah.
But if there were, that would mean that the job market for working in the comics industry is 2,500 people. That's 500 pencilers, 500 writers, 500 inkers, 500 colorists, 500 letterers. That's not counting people who write more than one title, colorists and letterers that are work on multiple books at once, inkers as well that sometimes are forced to ink more than one book a month. But even if you're just saying, you know, one person per art, and also, you know, artists that write, you know, pencil and ink their own work. But point being, as I said, that's an incredibly small job market.
Yeah.
And that's when I started getting into animation, actually. And through animation, I never got a job working full-time at an animation studio because I'm too loose and I just could never stay on model. But I was able to get a job as a web animator because I learned Flash. And so that led me from web animator to web designer to graphic designer to packaging designer for a toy company to product designer. And which eventually, in the end, led me back to working in animation, but it also, that's what got me back into working on my own comic book. Because I think at the time I got into the toy industry was when I had that regular job, I said, you know what? I may never. The point is that all the time between me getting out of school and me working in the toy industry full time, I had sort of like given up on comics. I still made personal artwork, but it was usually like standalone, individual drawings and paintings. And this was also a period when I wasn't taking figure drawing classes the way I've been doing for the past decade.
Nice.
So artwork, personal art was still part of my life, but it was like me making short animated films, or me just doing paintings and individual standalone pieces. But at that point, I think when I had finished the last animated short that I worked on, and I said, you know what, this took me so long to do. I could have done this. It was a story that I originally intended to do as a comic, but I said, well, let me do it as an animation. And it took me like 2 years to finish basically like a 9-minute animated short.
Yeah.
And I said, if I had just done this as a comic, it would have taken me a few months to do, because it was not even a single issue story. It would have been like a 12-page, 16-page story as a comic.
We keep joking on here because a really good friend of the show, and I do a show with him, Cory Kerr, is like this amazing illustrator, and he's always dipping into doing these After Effects projects that are these really cool illustrated animations. And he keeps trying to convince Scott and I to jump in on the animation train for short animation. And it's so addictive and tempting because it is cool to see your drawings move. But I keep joking with him, like, that's the one thing worse than comics for turnaround time. It's like, that's like literally the only people crazier than cartoonists are cartoonists who are doing animation. That's solo animation. Like, that's literally, I mean, you're quantifying the drawing to such an extent. But anyhow, it's funny you mentioned that, because that's one of the things I admire about animators, but also, like, I fear animation, and I fear the addiction to animation, because I have enough trouble with the comics and getting those done. I don't have to do in-betweens on the panels, that freaks me out, the idea of having to do in-betweens, and anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people do the indie comic things. Like, there's a filmmaker, Jim Lujan, who actually worked with Bill Plimpton.
Dude, okay, Jim's a buddy of mine.
Right, there you go. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, Jim's an amazing guy. Yeah. He makes it work. And I don't know how he does it, other than just drawing his ass off. But he's amazing, and his films are fun, and they're awesome. And he's like doing all of the voices in them. If there's other people doing voices in it, it's because he's just got a buddy in there for fun. Yeah. And he's just like a one-man shop. He's a miracle worker. I can't do what he does.
I don't understand his output. He has a simpler style than a lot of people, but even with the style and everything, it's just like, I don't understand his output. He's a machine, and I don't think there is another Jim out there. I don't. I mean, I'd say like Dominique Pulcino, I think his last name's pronounced. Yeah. He does some pretty rad indie animations too, but I don't know a lot of indie animators who can keep up the pace that Lujan does, because he'll put out it's insane. I can't even say the amount of animations he's made, because it's just that guy's a machine. I envy that.
yeah. I'm like, if I could like bottle that and just I could put that in a syringe and just inject it into my arm, I would just be burning out. Like, then I would be doing comics full time, because it would just be flowing out of me. But yeah, it's that whole process of productivity, and the thing about moving away from comics, the whole point of that long tangent was that I didn't see comics as something that was a profitable job market. Let me this way: there are people who make good livings in comics. It's just that number of people is about the size of the NBA. Yeah. Maybe the NFL. Actually, let's branch out a little bit more. The size of the NFL. And it's just such a small job market. I thought I am probably like, I honestly was like, I didn't think my artwork, I didn't think my artwork was at the level that I'm like, I don't think I can break into this field at that level. So it's like, and if I can't break in, then I got to look at what am I going to do out of college. And then I just thought, well, let me just find other ways to make a living and to be creative. And I got into animation and was doing animations on the side. And then I got, when I got into working in the toy industry and I had a certain amount of stability, because during those years, I was definitely doing the freelance thing. Well, it was less freelance and more sort of like contract jobs for 3 months, contract jobs for 6 months, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think I've always been kind of an in-house guy, but I've been in-house for small chunks here and there. Point being is that when I felt like I had a sense of stability, I was all, you know what? I still want to make comics.
Yep.
And that's what brought me back into starting to make the book that was my first graphic novel. And
that's so inspiring, because there's a lot of people, in-house. There's a lot of guys that I think could do with having, seeing their vision come to life outside of the workplace. Because I think there's different personalities, but there are some creatives who will kind of hinge all their hopes. And I've known some of them, they'll hinge all their hopes on Disney and be like, when I work at Disney, then everything's going to be perfect. And that's where all my creative fulfillment's going to go. And they'll go to Disney, and Disney has a lot of the same hangups as any job. And Disney's an incredible place to work, like most creative jobs. But like most creative jobs, there's still money, there's still budgets, there's still people with ideas that aren't going to agree with your ideas, that override your ideas and have you draw stuff you may not want to draw. And that's just kind of pretty much most creative work. So I do think the fact that, to me, it's cool to hear that you got inspired to actually do it, because there are a lot of people who will have this aspiration in their head of making comics and be one day, or if Marvel knocks on my door, then I'll make comics, or if such and such, then I'll make comics. And I think that's such a good wake up call. I'm glad you had it, because it is one of those moments. For me, it was very similar, where I was redrawing pages over and over again. It was when it was perfect enough, then I'll finish a book, And I remember very vividly that the day deciding to just no, this is how it's done. You actually just see it through, finish it, and then you're a cartoonist. There's no magic person who's going to be welcome to the cartooning world. But I think that's so cool. And that to me is it's just fun to hear, because like I said, I think there's a lot of people in creative jobs that have that kind of desire and then do nothing with it. And I think are the worst for it. Mm-hmm. Although again, I switch days on it, because like I said, sometimes it will feel I wonder what it's like just to get home and just turn on the television and just not just be yep, did my job, good to go. Yeah. Anyhow, sorry, I kind of derailed us a little bit.
Well, we're probably coming to the end of the episode, so I don't know if we want to start wrapping it up. If there's any last minute point you want to make to wrap anything up or anything like that, Jeremy? Is there anything we didn't cover that?
Well, I do have a last minute thought. This is something else that, and this is less of closing thought for us to end on, and more sort of, here's something for all of you to ponder. Because I considered another idea that's even more mad than all of the things I may have thrown up till now. But I just like to lob a grenade in the room and walk out. But I've thought, again, this whole idea of doing your best work versus really taking your time and crafting something beautiful. And knowing that I don't have nearly enough creative time for personal work already, one of the things I've been thinking about going forward, and this might also be dovetailing into wrapping up a bow on that 5-year plan, is I've thought about the possibility of doing 2 comics simultaneously, and to have that going forward. And I would have to try it first, see whether it kills me or not, before saying yes or no. And this does work. But the idea is to do 1 comic, minimum of a page a week, release it as a web comic, and just keep churning through until it's done. Because if you're doing a page a week, you're still going to have 52 pages at the end of a year. You can still put that in a small booklet. And maybe it wraps up the story. Maybe it takes me 2 years to wrap it up into like 4 issues or whatever. But the point is to have one book that is just the workmen's, the journeyman's, like you're just putting in the work. You just keep making the donuts. And then to have another book and say, I'm going to work on this page until I'm satisfied. And when you're satisfied with that one, you move on to the next one. And maybe it's something where, let's say that out of a given work week, let's say I have 10 hours for personal art every week. Maybe I split that time in half, and half the time is spent getting as much work done. Let's say that in that 5 hours, I may actually finish a page in that 5 hours, and then I go on to the other project, and maybe I only finish a panel out of that masterpiece page. Or maybe I break it down, like whatever I need to do to get. Let's say it takes me 8 hours a page. That's a pretty average, you know. Maybe I spend 8 hours a week working on the page that's going in the webcomic, and then I take those last 2 hours and I go to the masterpiece. And whenever the masterpiece page gets done, I move on to the next page of that. And then what happens is I've got like comic books coming out consistently. And then every 5 years, I drop this book that like looks like you can still recognize it's my style, but it's like, wow, you can see the quality of this. Like you can see each page looks as good as a cover. And that's just one of those things where I thought, I think we've all heard that anecdote. I think that comes up in like Malcolm Gladwell speeches where you have like a bunch of students taking a pottery class. The class is divided in half. Half the class is you'll be graded on the quality of your work. The other half says you'll be graded on the quantity of your work. And one class, people make like 20, 30 pots. One class, they make, one half of the class makes 20 or 30 of them. The other half, they make just like 2 or 3 pieces. They just take their time and make these masterpieces. But what it turns out is the people that made the fast ones, that made the quantity, also made the best work.
Yeah.
And so there's that. I think the logic tells you, well, if that's the case, just make the fast work. But I find that I still consistently, there's an inconsistency in my comics. Like if you look at the Morning Star, the series I've been doing, between each issue, because of the fact that every other issue I've tried to speed, one issue I try to speed up and go as fast as I can. Next issue I try to make it look as good as I can. And I found that when I speed up, the quality just still drops off to a level that I'm not satisfied with. So I thought, what if I give myself the liberty to do a work knowing that the wheels are shaky? It's not as good as what I think my best work is, but I still have this other thing on the side that I'm just polishing and polishing and polishing. I'm like, what if I try to have the best of both worlds? That's my crazy possible idea I might toy with in the future.
Ooh, I like that a lot. I think if you're going to do the masterwork thing, though, you still have to set some limits on yourself because there's always the catch of like the over rendering the drawing till it's just a big blob, and so there's always like a fine line to that. But I think that's a good idea to like kind of ease. Man, that's a cool idea. I also really, I think you've touched on a lot of really cool ideas, just food for thought. And I'm getting closer to wrapping up this project, moving on to possibly a little mid project before diving into the next. And the idea of like the visual, like approaching the viz dev for your own comic, like you would for an animation as a team, like an animation team, like do a little blue sky project for your own thing. I think that's just a really, I don't know. I think you've touched on a lot of really cool ideas, and it's gotten my mind churning, and hopefully a lot of people in the chats too. Yeah, what a cool.
Yeah, I can't even fathom doing more than one comic, but maybe do the comic and then maybe do like a piece or something like that, that you really focus on, and I don't know. or I don't know. As long as I guess if you can juggle the two of them, maybe the one where you're really diving deep into is like a 4-pager or something. I don't know, but it's something to think about. It's just it's just hard enough to do one comic, But
I'm mixed on it, right? Because so it's September, and I don't know if this has been released yet. If it hasn't, anybody who's a cartoonist should buy this. But there's a book coming out this month by Chris Ware called Rusty Brown, and I read an interview with him, and it feels to me like whenever I look at this guy's career, I'm just like, how is he doing this? Because he just puts out 600-page graphic novels that he colors, letters, hand letters, writes everything, and then he'll put out another 500-page graphic novel 2 years later. And it feels like he's unstoppable. But when he was being interviewed, he's like, yeah, so this is a product of 15 years of work. This graphic novel he's releasing now. So what is interesting is I think he's using the technique you're talking about where he's crossing different stories and building different stories. And it ends up having this crazy assault appearance at the end because which all started with Jimmy Corrigan, which was a comic that was built over 15 years. And in the meantime, during those 15 years, 7 of those years we're building the next book. And so it's an interesting tactic. I don't know if we can all be Chris Ware, but it's it is an interesting thought. I wonder, because you're right. You'd have the continual presence of pages coming out. And then out of nowhere, you'll have this other book. By the way, there's also this. Boom! It's this beautiful masterpiece. At least on paper, it sounds nice.
It's kind of how I think that's how Prince worked, where he just had all this stuff in a vault. And I heard there was a story where he was trying to get out of his record contract. He had to finish out his record contract, but he needed so many more albums, and he said, "Boom, here they are." And his contract because he had all that stuff. So
that's amazing. So the moral of the story is let's all be Prince.
Yeah. All right. So let's leave it at that. Let's wrap things up. So let's see. I guess we'll start with Josh. Josh, right. Anything you want to promote or anything you want to send people to?
Yeah, so go to joshuakemble.com to see my arts, selections of that. Go to quarterlystories.com if you want to see the thing I spend my little hour window after my long commute building, which I'm almost finished with, but that's at quarterlystories.com. This is a story about faith and mental illness, and it's autobiographical. It's handwritten, hand-lettered, and hand-inked, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And then also, you can check it out on topis.io. So if you're checking it out on your phone, go to topis.io and search for Quarterly Stories there. And it's just much more awesome on Android or iOS devices to read it that way. So, yeah.
Yeah. And Jeremy, what about you?
You can find me at jerimi.net. That's GERIMI.net. That website has the links to all of my social media, my Instagram, my Patreon, my newsletter, which I am also running my comic book Morning Star in my newsletter, but I'm running it at a slower rate than I am running it on my Patreon. But the point is that you can go there, get a few pages a month. You can also see I post links to some of my YouTube video highlights, figure drawings for my figure drawing process, works in progress. That's the best place to just keep up with what I'm doing.
Yeah, I definitely go to jeremy.net, but also, we have links to all our YouTube channels in the description too, where you can check those out as well.
I have a question though, Scott. There's this confusion with the links though, right? Because occasionally, I'll go to one of our channels and Artcasters is on, and then sometimes it's not, and it's on a different channel. How do I keep track of that?
Right. Well, there's an easy way to do that because we have our own newsletter, and we don't spam or anything like that. All we do is if you sign up for the Artcasters newsletter, and there is also a link in the description of this video for that, we will just send you about 30 minutes ahead of time. We'll send you an invite just an alert to let you know what day, what time, all that stuff, and just so you know where we're going to be. And you can click on that, and you'll be here, and you'll be able to watch us. And other than that, I was going to pitch the Comic Maker Toolkit again, but it looks like Frank Salazar in the chat is already pitching it for me in the chat. So
pitch it again, man. Pitch it again. People, you got to hear it 7 times.
So yeah. Anyway, but yeah, the Comic Maker Toolkit. I've got the Comic Maker Starter Kit. If you want the free version, you can go and just join my mailing list, and you'll get that. It's got tons of tools. But
wait, how much is that?
That one's free. That one's totally free. But if you want even more, and quite a bit more, the Comic Maker Toolkit just released it like a week or two ago, and it's just got tons of stuff. And I've had a lot of people in the chat already have purchased it, and I've got nothing but like rave reviews so far. I haven't heard anyone say anything negative about it. So hopefully that will. You're saving it up for a rainy day.
I'm saving it for my Comics Maker Toolkit.
All right. But yeah, that's at circworks.com. That's where you can get that. So I definitely want to thank the chat. We didn't call as many questions out. There's something going on with StreamYard right now where I actually have to refresh the page and pop back off and pop back in order to kind of share that stuff. But hopefully they'll get that fixed, because that's a super cool feature of StreamYard. I just wish it was working properly. But I do appreciate everyone in the chat, and we will, like I said, we're getting close to that 200 episodes. So stay tuned, and looking forward to that. Other than that, thanks again, Jeremy, and we will see everyone later. Thanks everyone in the chat. And there's always a lag when I click off of it, so you'll kind of hear us you see us like this. But yeah, everyone have a good night. We'll see.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much.
And we'll just kind of wait for the broadcast.